So good morning, everyone. I'd like to first thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak here today. So as Luis said, I would like to talk to you about data-driven, our efforts in developing data-driven statistical models of non-thermal particle acceleration driven by the kink instability in relativistic jets. So the high-level motivation of this work is that we're interested in understanding how particle acceleration and radiation emission in astrophysical jets. Much of the emission that's powered in these systems is believed to be magnetically driven by magnetic dissipation due to reconnection. But precisely what triggers reconnection, what triggers this dissipation, is still not entirely understood. One possibility is that throughout the jet's propagation in certain regions, you can trigger magnetohydrodynamic instabilities of the jet, and this can drive dissipation. And in fact, recent large-scale kinetic simulations have given support to this idea. So here's an example of some large 3D kinetic simulations. They're trying to capture what might go on in recollimation regions of these astrophysical jets. And we're seeing the development of the kink instability. And these large kinetic simulations are revealing that much of the dissipated magnetic energy is channeled into non-thermal particles. However, the physics that controls the shape of the spectrum that results from this type of acceleration is still not well understood either. And so to gain some insight into the physics that shapes the spectrum, we're interested in developing these reduced statistical models of non-thermal particle acceleration, Fokker-Planck type models. Doing so for these types of simulations, so the way we want to approach this is in a data-driven way. So from the data of these simulations, we want to build these reduced descriptions, these statistical descriptions. However, doing so from these very large-scale simulations presents a challenge. The data is quite significant. It's very big, and so doing so through traditional means is challenging. And so we've been inspired to explore different approaches using techniques from the field of machine learning or scientific machine learning. And so that's what I would like to talk to you today. Much of this work is done by students. I would like to highlight much of this work was done by an undergraduate student named Sam Deegan at UCLA, together with the help of Gabby Guttormson, who will be giving a talk on a related topic later in this session. And I will also highlight a little bit the work done by Diogo Carvalho, who is a graduate student at IST, being co-advised by both myself and Professor Luis Silva, who's also been developing machine learning techniques to tackle this type of problem. A slightly different context, but relevant nonetheless. And I'd like to share that work. So, here, I want to reiterate that we have been studying how particles are accelerated due to the development of magnetohydrodynamic instabilities, in particular kink instability. And some of the work that we have done has shown that under certain conditions, we see very efficient non-thermal particle acceleration. And so here are examples of particle spectra that result from the development of the kink instability in these scenarios. And these different curves are done for different simulations with increasing scale separation, with increasing jet size with respect to the Larmor radius of thermal particles. And what we see is that as we increase the scale separation between the radius of the jet and the Larmor scale of thermal particles, we see that this power law index is preserved, but the cutoff energy is pushed further out. So we see systematic acceleration up to the confinement energy of the jet. However, the physics that controls that index, okay, for these simulations, we're seeing indices of the order gamma to the minus 2.7. The physics that controls this index is not well understood. We actually see that when we vary the magnetization, the spectrum gets shallower. As we increase sigma, we see that the spectrum gets shallower, which we do not fully understand yet. Other works by Develar and Ortunio Macias, have also explored kink instability in different regimes, in force-free scenarios. There were different plasma and magnetic field configurations. And what the picture that is emerging is that the efficiency of acceleration is sensitive to the details of the plasma and magnetic field configuration. So again, the physics of what controls the shape of the spectrum is not well understood, and how it depends on plasma conditions and magnetic field conditions is not well understood either. And this is what motivates us to start to look at these problems through the lens of these reduced statistical models of particle acceleration. So here again is an example of this particular problem that we're looking at. So we're looking at the development of the kink instability in these so-called pressure-supported jets, where the jet has a purely toroidal magnetic field, and the Hoops stress of the magnetic field is being balanced by a gradient in the thermal pressure of the jet. And as a consequence of the development of the kink, we get essentially magnetic turbulence. And here are here's a visualization of the turbulent field structure that arises inside the jet, and we've got particles scattering inside this turbulence. And so this motivates the development so we believe that particles, by stochastically interacting with this turbulence, we think that a good description of what's going on here may be modeled as a Fokker-Planck type equation. So here is Fokker-Planck type equation in energy, in gamma. So we've got diffusion and advection. And we'd like to characterize this for this system. Now this system is spatially compact. Okay, there is a well-defined acceleration region where the fields are strong and where acceleration takes place. And then there's a region outside the jet where particles can simply escape the accelerating region. So we're including this effect. So the way we would like to model this is a very simple model, a kind of two-zone model. You're either inside the jet or you're outside the jet. Inside the jet, you experience advection and diffusion, you experience energization, and you may escape with some probability outside the jet. And over here, we've got the background, which simply is a reservoir that picks up particles that escaped from the jet. And so this is what we would like to extract from our simulations. Now, the traditional way of doing this is by, there are two approaches. One approach is doing so from looking at raw particle tracks. So here is an example of some trajectories that are obtained from our simulation. So this is time and this is energy, and particles for a long time are not experiencing any acceleration. The kink isn't developing, where we start the simulation from a hydromagnetic equilibrium, and then from thermal fluctuations we get the development of the kink. So no acceleration, then boom, the kink instability takes place. We get an accelerating field structure, and particles accelerate. Now, there's a sample of 2,000 particles, and this gray mess here is individual particle trajectories. And if one would look at this closely, you would see that some particles are scattering, are being kicked around in energy. So this again reinforces that some advection diffusive type of process is taking place. And so one approach would be to gather statistics of the kicks in energy and kicks the moments of delta gamma in certain intervals of time to get advection and diffusion. Also want to emphasize that this is a transient process. So the advection and diffusion is going to be intrinsically time dependent and energy dependent. For our simulations, this is computationally very intensive. There are many, many particles. And so memory-wise, saving the tracks of many, many particles to do this is computationally very, very challenging, particularly for our largest simulations. So the only way I see us doing this properly would be to do this at runtime, carry out these diagnostics as we're carrying out these simulations. Another approach is to extract these equations or extract these coefficients directly from the evolution of the particle spectrum. So my group has been I've been interested, my group has been exploring the use of machine learning techniques, scientific machine learning techniques, to extract equations directly from data. And so that's the approach we're trying to do over here. So we're essentially looking for equations through an optimization process. We're trying to find which are the best equations that describe the data that we're seeing. And looking at, turns out that saving data of the spectrum is far cheaper, far less memory intensive than saving all the trajectories. And there are a few other advantages of doing this that I'll try to highlight a little later. So here's an example of the evolution, so this is the evolution of the spectrum that we see. So this is energy and this is time, and for a while the spectrum isn't evolving, the kink instability hasn't triggered yet. Again, this is in an equilibrium. And then the instability is triggered, and we see the development of an energetic tail. And here on the right, we're looking at the particle distribution function in the background, outside of the jet. And we can see that after a while, we've got particles escaping and leaving this region. So we can directly infer, actually, directly from the data, by computing the time derivative of the background distribution function, we can immediately extract an energy-dependent and time-dependent escape rate, okay, which is over here. And we see that for a long time, there is no escape rate. And after some time, towards the end of the run, or deep into the acceleration phase, there is there's an energy-dependent and time-dependent escape rate that develops. And so this is an important aspect to understand the particle spectrum. Now, the way we find A and D is by optimizing this. So we utilize machine learning techniques to solve this large optimization problem. Find D and A such that this equation is satisfied in the least square sense on the data that we're seeing. Okay. So the way we do this in practice is that we parameterize these functions that we're interested in, A and D, as neural networks. So these are universal approximators. We're trying to fit A and D such that this equation is satisfied on the data. And this is the result of that optimization process. So here we're seeing the advection in energy, the time-dependent and energy-dependent advection in energy, and diffusion, energy diffusion. And we see, again, in this phase, things are quiet. The kink instability develops here, and what we see here is an energy-dependent diffusion and an energy-dependent advection. And it turns out that you see that the most energetic particles advect more than low energy particles. And this is kind of the ingredient you need to develop heavy tails, heavy particle tails. So that's what we see over here. The diffusion, however, looks very, very strange, very inhomogeneous. We don't recognize this structure, and we don't fully understand why we're obtaining these types of structures. However, when we take these advection and diffusion coefficients and numerically integrate now the Fokker-Planck equation, we see that we can very accurately reproduce the data of the simulation. So these solid lines represent the actual data of the simulation. These dashed lines represent numerical integration of the Fokker-Planck equation with these advection and diffusion equations. So this is happening. This is very accurate. However, what we've learned is that these advection and diffusion coefficients are not unique when one does this process. If we do this optimization process again, but we start from a different initial guess for our advection diffusion, so different random weights of our neural network, we see a slightly different advection and diffusion coefficient. Okay, so this is what we have learned from doing this exercise, is that there are in fact a family of solutions of advection and diffusion that can give the same Fokker-Planck behavior. And this family of solutions depends on the details of the distribution function that we're learning from. So we cannot uniquely determine this from the evolution of a single distribution function. However, the solution to this is to utilize more than one distribution function. So by the way we're implementing this right now is that we have test particles also in the simulation that start out with a different spectrum, but experience the same advection and diffusion. And by trying to now fit or find advection and diffusion that describes the evolution of these two populations, we can uniquely determine these advection and diffusion coefficients. And so here is the result. I will stop. Here is the result of that process. What we have found is that when one does this, we find some issues with this model. So what we find is that we find advection and diffusion coefficients that have very similar properties to what I showed earlier. However, when we reconstruct the distribution functions that we have obtained from this by numerically integrating, we see that there are some gaps. We qualitatively get the right answer, but it's not very precise. And this suggests that there's some missing physics here, that there are some problems with our model. And what we believe is happening is that the acceleration is anisotropic. Okay, so we're trying to treat this as just changes in gamma, but it turns out that the acceleration is highly anisotropic. Particles are preferentially accelerated along the jet instead of transversely, and we're now taking this into account in this problem. So finding advection, expanding the complexity of this model. I will stay here. I will leave it at this point since I'm over time. But if there is an opportunity for questions about Diogo's work, I will use this opportunity to talk about that. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so we have time for questions. Yes, Lorenzo.
I was wondering whether you can comment on the potential contribution of spatial inhomogeneities. Like, I mean, you're treating the problem as a homogeneous in space problem. Mm-hmm. And we have already learned that even in the most, let's say, naively homogeneous problem, which is, let's say, acceleration of particles in turbulence, spatial structures, specific spatial structures can actually play a significant role. So,
yeah, I think you're right. I don't yet know what is the importance of that. That is something that we can relatively easily explore with using these techniques. But we thought that our approach here is to start with the simplest model and then begin to refine. So we're doing a two-zone model. So it's not entirely homogeneous, but within that, inside that, we're saying that we're homogenizing, but it may be important.
Yes, Chris.
So astrophysical jets are famously very long and thin. So do you have a sense for how the development of the instability you've studied would progress over a very large length, and could you maintain particle acceleration over a very large length?
So my understanding of the picture that we have of where this occurs is in one of the regions where this can occur is when the jet recollimates, in recollimation regions of the jet. And so in my mind, what happens is that a parcel of jet plasma, as it traverses this recollimation region, is going to experience this kink. It's going to, you're going to get particle acceleration in that phase, but then that parcel, as it leaves, is not going to experience any further acceleration. So that kink happens locally, and it's going to occur on a time or on a distance that is associated with a dynamical time of this instability, which is a few tens of light crossing times of the radius of the jet.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. In the part where you found the degeneracies in the advection and diffusion coefficients and then started using tracer particles to eliminate this degeneracy, does that sort of point to using approach 1 instead of approach 2 to consider, the full tracer histories and to look at maybe just isolating even just parallel P perp and P parallel, and doing some statistics on that?
Yeah, it looks like we added more computational complexity up front, right? So to add more particles. I think there are ways. First, there's nothing wrong with doing things through the particle trajectories. I think that's the most direct way of doing this. However, the way I think we should do this in the future, but it requires some additional development, is that instead of using additional test particles, we could tag the original particles and create subpopulations of those original particles. and ensure that those subpopulations just have different spectra, okay? And then you would have, you would keep the same number of particles fixed, and you would have multiple distribution functions. That's the way I think we should do that. And that's, in fact, what has been done in Diogo's work here that I did not talk about, but I can talk about this offline.
Yeah, we have a last question online. If there's a hand that is there, no?
Sorry, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm wondering, have you ever tried to use this machine learning method to feed an observation spectrum or the spectrum from laboratory results instead of from the simulations?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that question?
So I'm wondering, have you ever tried to feed the observation spectrum with like the machine learning technique you mentioned?
Fit the operator.
Observational data.
Oh, no, we have not tried to do that. Yeah, if you have, no, we have not tried to do that. And so you're saying that if you've got time-resolved spectra, yeah, you could do this.
Yeah.
However, related to this, I will just say that there is a work that came out recently by Enrico Camporeal and has used similar techniques in space physics to study precipitation of radiation belt electrons and has used similar techniques. However, at the time, I don't think their work recognized this degeneracy, and I think we've shed some light on that.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So thank you very much, Paulo.
Thank you.
Thank you.